Okay, well, welcome, Anne, to this week's Holy Grounds conversation. This is
Good
for
to see
the,
you.
yeah, good to see you. This is for the second Sunday in Lent, February 28th. As you have already shared with folks, and I shared with folks on Saturday, our preaching series for this Lent is on the Ten Commandments. So
Right.
you'll be preaching on Saturday. I'll be preaching on Sunday. Our
Mhm.
focus will be on the third and fourth commandments,
Right,
but we
right.
also want to look at the lectionary because these are the readings you're all going to hear on
Mhm.
Saturday and Sunday. The reading we're going to look at today is the gospel reading, which
Right,
is Mark chapter 8, verses 31 to 38.
right.
Okay, so I'm going to read from a translation that I've used in Bible study, and I'm using in a Bible study right
Okay.
now.
Hmm.
It's pretty close to what you're going to hear on Sunday,
Yeah.
so you probably won't notice the differences. So here is the gospel reading. And he began to teach them that it is necessary for the Son of Man to suffer many things, and to be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes, and to be killed, and after 3 days to rise again. And he made this declaration frankly. And taking hold of him, Peter began to admonish him. But he, turning about and looking at his disciples, admonished Peter and says, "Get behind me, accuser, because you think not the things of God, but those of men." And summoning the crowd along with his disciples, he said to them, "If anyone wishes to come along behind me, let him deny himself utterly and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his soul will lose it. But whoever will lose his soul for the sake of me and of the good tidings will save it. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole cosmos and to forfeit his soul? For what might a man give in exchange for his soul? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him too will the Son of Man be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. That is the gospel passage. So just want to share with folks, this is the New Testament. It's David Bentley Hart. I cannot recommend this translation highly enough. It's a very, it came out about 2 or 3 years ago. It's with a lot of praise and criticism. It's really distinct. You'll notice in this one, instead of "get behind me, Satan," he translates the Greek more literally, which is the accuser. And life he translates for soul, and I think it's a really
Yeah.
refreshing kind of image. So this is one of the first times in the Gospel of Mark that Jesus relays his messianic vocation to the fact that he's going to be killed.
Yeah.
And obviously this was not received well or understood very clearly by the disciples. um, a lot of confusion around this, and certainly with the confrontation with Peter. It's also where we get the phrase to take up your cross.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and so just the first thing I just wanted to ask you, Anne, what does that phrase to take up our cross or take up your cross, what does that mean to you personally?
Um, when I think of taking up my cross, the first thing that comes to mind is, what did Jesus do when he took up his cross? What did it mean to be crucified?
Mhm.
And um, when I think of Jesus taking up his cross, he took it up voluntarily. He took it up with humility and with vulnerability. And so when I think of taking up a cross, it's something that we voluntarily take on. It's not like something that's imposed on you.
Yeah,
And I think it's
yeah,
to live life a certain way. He talks about, you mentioned the translation of that word life, and another translation that I've heard is spirit.
mm,
So it's just another way of looking at that. I mean, what does it mean to spiritually take up your cross? Um,
absolutely, yeah,
yeah. And so, when somebody is sick, or somebody has cancer, or that's not taking up your cross, because that's something that's imposed on you. But taking up your cross is choosing to follow that life of humility and servanthood and vulnerability, because that's what the cross means, and that there can be suffering involved in that.
Yeah.
But it's not imposed suffering. It's suffering that you take on.
Yeah.
That's
It's not
my
suffering for,
understanding of cross.
yeah, not suffering
Yeah.
for suffering's sake, but yeah,
Right.
I think that's a beautiful way to contextualize it too, that the idea that the cross was something that Jesus took up voluntarily, and that was in some ways the natural result of his whole life and his whole mission and his whole way of life, which was not returning violence with violence.
Right. And what it means to be most fully human, because I think Christ crucified really represents the best of what it means to be human.
Yes, and ironically at the same time shows the worst of humanity.
Right. And at the same time, so it's like a double-sided cross, however we want to use that. Something else that struck me in the scripture today, and I've heard other translations where Jesus says, "Get behind me, Satan." But if you put an emphasis on a different word, "Get behind me, Satan." Follow me, Satan. Follow me, Peter. Get behind me in my ways, as opposed to get out of here. It changes it a little bit. It's rather than just dismissing, it's also an invitation to follow me. Get behind me, follow me. But it was also, I think, a temptation for Jesus as well.
And also and the idea of, I think, going along with that same kind of focus is something we both talked about in our preaching on this past weekend, was the idea of idolatry. And so what do we choose to follow? And Jesus's invitation as the true icon of the true God is saying, by following me, you will have not only salvation, but that is the way of joy. There may be suffering in that. It's not just happiness, but it is important what and who we follow. And that spatial element is so clear. And with Jesus following God's will that in revealing Jesus's life to us, that God was not going to repay us with murder the way that we repaid God with murder.
Right.
That idea of Jesus following the Father's will too. So that's great.
And that also the idea of, if we think of where joy comes from and the difference between, choosing happiness and choosing joy, happiness is like external stuff that causes us to feel certain things.
Yeah.
But joy is internal. It's finding that joy in those places that give us meaning and purpose. And so I think to keep that in mind as well, is that there can be joy. You can find that in suffering, and how we work through suffering. We can be miserable with it if something's hard, or we can. I don't want to glorify suffering, because I don't think God does that and wants that. But, I think of, and I've shared, I had a cousin who had a horrible chronic illness. And yet every day she found something to be joyful about, and she found meaning and purpose even in her suffering, if she could offer a word of encouragement to someone else who might be suffering or struggling. And, I so admire people who really emulate Jesus in their suffering. They're not bitter.
Well, and I think that's the what you're bringing up is really crucial, is how is our own story, which may include suffering, embraced by the larger story of Jesus. And so our story is never isolated, and so our suffering is never isolated either. I think is important. At the same time, I want to ask you another question, which is, have you heard, or maybe somebody has said this to you, or you've heard in your pastoral care that you've given to others, how this phrase has been misunderstood or misused? And you've talked already a little bit about this, about, you know, the ways that people may have heard this misused and therefore are reluctant to embrace this call to take up our cross.
I have, actually, and something in particular. I was working with someone, not at St. John's, it was years back, who was in an abusive relationship with her husband.
Yeah.
And her another pastor told her that, you know, that was just her cross to bear, because marriage was for a lifetime. And I was just struck at you know, God doesn't want that for us, that kind of those kinds of relationships, and that isn't something that she chose.
Yeah.
Now she could choose to stay in that relationship because she thinks that might be redeemed in some way through therapy or whatever. But again, that isn't something that she has to do. So you know, if somebody's you know, I think particularly with illnesses and really unhealthy relationships, those are not crosses that God's calling us to bear.
Yeah. And I think your point at the beginning about the voluntary nature, that it is something that we choose and not something that is hoisted on us.
Just as Christ chose the cross.
Yeah, I think that's really
he
crucial.
chose that life, which is really clear.
Yeah, and that's real. That's very. I find that very helpful and very crucial. And I think it makes it with that distinction where suffering is not the point, but might be part of the path.
Right. You know? Absolutely. And I do think that God can redeem suffering. You know, that God can use it. I certainly don't think, though, that God imposes it on us to teach us a lesson or you know, or for punishment or those,
well,
to test us.
Again,
although
going
it
back,
can be a testing, but I don't think God uses those things to test us.
Yeah, and I think the testing may be the ways in which we avoid the suffering that is a result of living a life of love.
Right.
You know, so
which requires suffering on occasion.
I mean, probably more often than not, because we're gonna, you know, we're gonna face the reality that what the world does to love is what the world did to Jesus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In the end, right?
And distorts.
And then God redeems that.
Right. The resurrection.
Yeah.
So I mean, which is what our hope lies in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that creation is redeemed, and that we can be part of the redemption until the final and fullness of the kingdom.
But exactly. We can be part of that now, and then into its full kind of revelation of
as we take up our cross.
Yeah. A couple things I want, just as a way of, you know, this season of Lent, is maybe you can share what the most difficult parts for you, maybe just currently in following Jesus, and some of the most joyful parts. Because this is a season where we kind of reflect on this very question we get in Mark's gospel of taking up your cross. So what in that has been difficult, and what in that has been joy-filled?
You know, particularly in this season, this year for Lent, I gave up, you know, certain things that aren't necessarily always good for me, and not chocolate, but you know,
I know for the chocolate industry must think that Christians
I know
are
they're just getting whacked this year. But online shopping, unnecessary.
Oh, interesting.
Unnecessary filling myself up with things that aren't always life-giving. And so that's something that I've given up. But I've taken on this Lent a discipline of daily reading about, and it's been really hard, the suffering of African Americans throughout the history of this country with chattel slavery. And it's heartbreaking to read their stories. And then this particular devotional I'm using is then linking it to scriptures that have been used against people who are enslaved.
Oh, wow.
As a way to justify. And so that it's just been breaking my heart to see that.
What prompted you to take that up?
Well, I've been thinking long and hard about this idea of racial reconciliation and reparations, and there's so much baggage with those words, and to be able to put myself in the place, which I can't do fully, of a people who have suffered the effects of things that happened years ago and that I've benefited from. Not that I've participated in it actively, but that I've been the beneficiary of systems that have been in place, and to be able to name that and recognize it. I mean, and I've had some tough conversations about, well, you know, I didn't participate in slavery. I didn't, you know, my ancestors didn't do that. And just to remind myself that, you know, there's a mutuality and interdependence that we all have, and that when one of us suffers, we all suffer. But we, you know, to be open to that mutuality and interdependence is very countercultural in right now, particularly when we think of all of, you know, personal rights, which are important, but not above what it means to be a community of followers of the way of Jesus. We are connected. And so if somebody's struggling in a community, my heart should break for them. And so I'm trying to take some of that on and gain a better understanding of how I can make a difference in some way. And so
it's a beautiful, you know, when you've been speaking about this, and it reminds me of my favorite Bible passage, which is Galatians 6:2, you know, bear one another's burdens, and in that way fulfill the law of Christ. So I think that kind of bearing in not averting your eyes is beautiful.
And
you know,
it's easy to avert your eyes. Really easy.
Yeah, we do it all the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's kind of a joy-filled in kind of taking up your cross, which is for most of us maybe a funny way of saying it, or a strange way of saying it?
You know, I think for me is to make use of my time to help my family, particularly my daughters right now who have children, a way for me to give of myself brings me incredible joy when I'm able to spend time, particularly with my grandchildren right now. I mean, I may not want to spend my day off down at my daughter's helping out, but when I do that, I'm joy filled, because I know that what I'm doing is giving me meaning, but also I know it's helping her.
It's life-giving.
Yeah, it is life-giving. So, you know, I find ways that that I can reach out to others. It fills me with joy, even though it may be a sacrifice on my part. So that's when I think about taking up my cross. That's where I find joy. Is knowing that I'm making a difference in some way.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, thank you. Wonderful.
You're welcome.
And again, just to want to invite people, we have a daily service of Compline at 9 p.m. every day through our Facebook page. So please join us for that. We have morning prayer on Thursdays at 8 a.m. We have evening prayer on Saturdays at 5 p.m. Facebook Live. And
Mondays.
And Mondays too, exactly, yes. And we'll have our, probably we'll be back in the historic church. We just had a big,
in a few weeks,
a big installation for our live. This will be trying out some new beautiful equipment for the glory of God. So hopefully
for the glory of God. We always keep that in mind, for the glory of God.
And it will be.
Yeah.
It will be. So I'm excited for that. So I'm just wishing everyone continuing to have a holy and faithful Lent. So
great.
But thank you, Anne.
Stephen. Enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, always.
All right,
Bye-bye.
We'll see you later. Bye.
Okay.